Lena Sanchez wiped down the last sticky table, her feet aching after another long shift at Moe's diner. Waitressing was far from her dream job, but it paid the bills while she pursued her true calling as a martial arts instructor on the weekends. At 25, the petite Afro-Latina had already earned her third-degree black belt in Krav Maga, the self-defense system developed by the Israeli military. But to the rough crowd that frequented Moe's, she was just a meek little thing, an easy target in her pink uniform and ponytail. "Hey, sweetheart, how about a smile with that coffee?" a gruff voice called out behind her. Lena turned to see Mickey and his crew, the local street toughs who fancied themselves gangsters, leering at her from their booth. She shot them a placid grin before turning back to her work, determined to ignore their catcalls and rude gestures. This was nothing new. She'd been putting up with harassment from guys like them her whole life, first as a shy, bookish girl growing up in a rough part of Chicago, then as one of the only women in her martial arts classes. She had learned to keep her head down, to not make waves. But lately, Mickey and his boys had been getting bolder, more aggressive in their advances. Just last week, the ringleader had cornered her by the bathrooms, backing her against the wall with his beefy forearm. "Come on, baby. You know you want a taste," he had growled, his tobacco-stained breath hot on her cheek. It had taken every ounce of Lena's restraint not to drop him right there with a palm strike to the chin. But she couldn't afford to lose this job, couldn't risk the backlash of bruising the fragile egos of men like Mickey. So she had simply ducked under his arm and scurried away, her face burning with humiliation and pent-up rage. Now, as the diner finally emptied out, Lena allowed her customer service mask to slip. She scowled as she swept up the detritus of the dinner rush, greasy napkins, cigarette butts, ketchup-smeared fries. She had busted her ass in this dump from sunrise to closing time every day for the last few months, scraping together the cash for studio space for her Krav Maga class. A women's self-defense class, for girls just like her, the quiet victims, the ones who walked through the world with keys clutched between white knuckles and hearts hammering at every catcall and leer. She was almost there, just a few $100 shy of her goal, just a few more shifts of swallowing her pride and her anger, a few more days of being invisible. A loud bang startled Lena out of her thoughts. Mickey and two of his thugs had burst back into the diner, clearly drunk and spoiling for trouble. They stomped towards her, Mickey in the lead, an ugly smirk twisting his face. "Kitchen's closed, fellas," Lena said coolly, tightening her grip on the broom handle. "I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." Mickey laughed, an abrasive bray. "Oh, we ain't going nowhere, chica," he slurred. "Not till we get what we came for." His eyes raked over her body, lingering on the curves beneath her uniform. His buddies snickered behind him, cracking their knuckles. Lena felt a familiar tightness in her chest, her vision narrowing. This was bad. There was no one else here, no witnesses, no backup. Just her and three drunk, angry men who had already shown they didn't understand the word no. She glanced around, calculating distances, evaluating escape routes with the practiced eye of a lifelong martial artist. The diner's front door was only a few strides away, but the thugs were closer, and there were three of them blocking her path. Her mind flashed to the headlines she saw all too often. Another waitress raped, another woman of color missing, another Jane Doe in the morgue. Number, not her, not like this. Lena drew herself up to her full height, just a hair over 5 feet, and squared her shoulders beneath her pink uniform. She slowly reached up and pulled the elastic from her hair, shaking it loose around her face. Mickey and his boys hooted and whistled, mistaking the gesture for an invitation. They didn't see the change come over her, the icy calm that settled in her eyes, the way her stance shifted subtly into a fighting crouch. They didn't notice the toned muscles that rippled under her dark skin as she adjusted her weight to the balls of her feet, loose and ready. They didn't recognize the ghost of a smirk that corked one corner of her mouth, there and then gone. To them, she was still just a skinny little Latina. Easy prey, their mistake. "I'm going to tell you one more time," Lena said softly, her voice steady. "Leave. Now." Mickey exchanged a disbelieving glance with his cohorts, then barked out a laugh. "Oh, I'll leave all right," he leered, taking a menacing step forward. "After I teach you some manners, you uppity bit." But that was as far as he got, because suddenly Lena was a blur of motion, a tempest of precise strikes and flowing throws. In one blink, she crossed the distance, slamming a palm heel into the underside of Mickey's chin with an audible crack. His head snapped back and he crumpled, out cold, before he even hit the grimy linoleum. His two flunkies goggled at her in shock, jaws slack. The bigger one, Lou, she thought his name was, recovered first, letting out a bellow of rage and charging her head-on with his ham-hock fists swinging wildly. Lena almost pitied him as she sidestepped smoothly, using his own momentum and her low center of gravity to launch him up and over in a classic hip throw. He sailed over the counter, crashing into the milkshake machine with a whoosh of displaced dairy and a shriek of crumpling metal. The third guy, scrawny, jittery Sammy, turned to bolt, his boots skidding on the slick floor. Lena took 2 quick steps and swept his legs out from under him in a vicious cut kick, pivoting into a knuckle strike to the throat as he fell. He hit the ground, wheezing and gagging while she followed him down, pinning him flat with a knee on his sternum and the broom handle pressed to his windpipe. "Listen up, you piece of trash," she hissed into his purpling face. "I know every lowlife and wannabe in this neighborhood. I know who's slinging what on which corners. I know where you keep your stash and who you're running for." She leaned in closer, digging the broomstick a little deeper. "And they all know me, what I can do. So you go back and give your little playmates a message. This diner, these streets, they're mine now, and I won't be harassed in my own house. Got it?" Sammy gurgled something that might have been assent, his eyes rolling back in his head. Lena held him there a moment longer, just to make sure he felt it, just to make sure they all would remember. Then she rocked back on her heels, rising smoothly to her feet. Sammy crawled backwards like a crab, coughing and spitting. Lena watched him scuttle away, her face impassive, her eyes flinty. She looked around at the carnage she had wrought, the cracked plaster, the bleeding bodies. It would be a pain to clean up, but it was worth it. It had been a long time coming. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she sure as hell wasn't prey. Lena cracked her neck, rolling out the tension, letting the adrenaline ebb. Then she picked up her broom and got back to work. She had a studio space to rent and a diner to close. And for the first time in a long time, she found herself humming while she swept, a fierce little smile playing at her lips. It was a new day in the neighborhood. The unassuming warrior had arrived. In the weeks that followed, word spread quickly about what had happened at Moe's. The story grew with each telling, the tiny waitress taking out 3, no 5, no a dozen, armed thugs without breaking a nail. Some said she was a ninja, a secret agent, a supernatural being. Most just knew her as that girl you didn't mess with, the one with lightning in her fists and steel in her spine. Enrollment at Lena's nascent studio, Iron Lotus Defense, surged almost overnight. Women from the neighborhood and beyond flocked to learn at the feet of the pint-sized powerhouse. Lena found herself struggling to keep up with demand, packing the Spartan studio morning to night with self-defense classes, rape prevention seminars, conflict de-escalation workshops. Her students were a glorious mosaic, teen moms and grandmothers, housewives and ex-cons, all colors and body types imaginable. She even had a few sheepish men, the quiet ones, the gentle giants who were so often targets of violence themselves. Lena poured her heart and soul into the work, drawing on her own life experience, her triumphs and traumas. She taught them the same lessons she had learned the hard way: how to walk without fear, how to carry themselves with unshakable confidence, how to turn an attacker's force against them. But more than the physical techniques, she taught them to trust their instincts, to set boundaries, to know their own worth, things no one had ever taught her. It wasn't easy. Many of her students were survivors themselves, wrestling with the scars of abuse and assault. They would freeze up when grabbed, break down sobbing after an intense drill, lash out in panicked fury. But Lena was always there to walk them through it, to hug them as they shook, to remind them of their inherent strength. "You already have everything you need to protect yourself," she would tell them, her voice ringing with conviction. "Your body, your brain, your gut. You just have to believe it. You just have to unlearn all the doubt and degradation that the world has tried to plant in you." She talked a lot about unlearning in those early days, about deprogramming the toxic lessons beaten into so many women from birth. That they were weak, that they were helpless, that their bodies and safety were not they. Lena stepped over the prone form of her attacker and continued on her way home. her head held high. She refused to let this incident shake her, to give some small-minded coward the power to make her feel unsafe in her own neighborhood. She had fought too hard, come too far, to let fear rule her now. When she arrived back at her apartment, she found a small package waiting on her welcome mat. Curious, she picked it up and turned it over in her hands. It was light, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address, just her name printed neatly on the front. Inside, Lena found a single sheet of folded paper. It was a letter, written in a shaky but determined hand. Dear Lena, you don't know me, but I feel like I know you. I've been attending your self-defense classes at Iron Lotus for a few months now. I'm the quiet one who always stays in the back, too shy to speak up. I wanted to write to you to say thank you. Thank you for teaching me how to stand up for myself, how to set boundaries, how to say no and mean it. Thank you for showing me that I'm stronger than I ever knew. Before I found Iron Lotus, I was in a really bad situation. My boyfriend, ex-boyfriend now, he used to hurt me. He made me feel so small, so powerless, like I deserved it somehow. I thought that was just how relationships were supposed to be. But watching you, hearing the way you talk about women's worth and autonomy, something started to shift in me. I started to recognize his manipulations, his scare tactics. I started to imagine a different kind of life. 2 weeks ago, I finally got the courage to leave him. I packed a bag, waited till he was at work, and just walked out. It was the hardest and most liberating thing I've ever done. I'm safe now, staying with my sister across town. I've started therapy, and I'm looking into going back to school. Slowly but surely, I'm rebuilding my life. And I know I never could have gotten here without Iron Lotus, without you. You saved my life, Lena. I just wanted you to know that. Forever grateful, a warrior in progress. Lena read the letter twice over, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This was what made it all worth it. The long hours, the aching muscles, the endless battles, both physical and emotional. Knowing that her work, her words, were reaching people, changing people, saving people. She thought of her quietest student, the mousy woman who always seemed to be folding in on herself, trying to disappear. Lena had noticed the fading bruises, the hunched posture, the haunted eyes. She had suspected abuse, but hadn't wanted to pry. Instead, she had made sure to spend a little extra time with the woman after class, offering gentle encouragement and subtle guidance on the skills that might serve her most. Escaping wrist grabs, breakaway techniques, how to fall without injury. And it seemed those seeds she had planted, watered with sweat and nurtured with compassion, had finally borne fruit. Another cycle broken, another sister freed, another warrior born. Lena clutched the letter to her chest, a watery smile spreading across her face. Suddenly, her brush with danger seemed so insignificant, so remote. Let the small men with their small minds come at her with all the bigotry and brutality they could muster. She had a sisterhood at her back now, an army of indomitable spirits. Together they would stand tall. Together they would turn this neighborhood, this world, upside down. She couldn't wait to see what the next day would bring, what other transformations were brewing, because this, she knew, was just the beginning. A whole city of unassuming warriors was awakening, and Lena would be there to greet them. Renewed purpose surging through her veins, Lena sat down at her battered desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began to write. To my warrior sister, your letter was a balm to my weary soul. Thank you for trusting me with your story, your strength, your beautiful fighting spirit. I am so deeply proud of you. And she wrote long into the night, pouring out encouragement and advice, admiration and solidarity. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes blurred, because these were the moments that mattered, these connections, these hard-won confidences. This was how they would change the world, one woman, one word, one indomitable act at a time. When the first gold fingers of dawn pried at her windowsill, Lena finally set down her pen. She had a stack of letters to deliver now, a whole network of quiet courage to set ablaze. She would slip them under doors, tuck them into mailboxes, press them into work-roughened palms. Little paper seeds to sprout and bloom, She stretched, rolled her shoulders, shook out her hands. It was time to get to work. Her city was waking up, and her warriors were waiting. With a fierce grin, Lena strode out to meet the day, her steps sure and her head high. She had a revolution to lead, and an army at her back. And she had never felt more alive.